from the Mavenir stand at MWC. And joining me we have Timothy Last of Iridium, Willie Stegmann of the TM Forum, and Sachin Karkala of Mavenir. Thank you all for joining me. As you're all aware, non-terrestrial networks are a very hot topic both here at the show and in the industry right now. There's obviously a lot going on. In this discussion, we're going to bring an AI lens to that. We're going to look in particular as to what value AI can apply to non-terrestrial networks. So that is the topic of the day. We're going to start by looking at progress to date, so how NTNs are changing. I'm going to start with Timothy. First question here for you.
Sure.
In the past, it's all been about coverage extension, but now I think we're moving the business proposition more to value-added services. Talk us through the progress we've made on that.
Yeah, morning everybody. Obviously NTN has been here in the industry for the last 3 or 4 years. It's only 4 years since Release 17 got certified or ratified. So in technology terms, it's a relatively new kind of thing for the mobile and cellular industry. If you're old as me, you remember that the first text message was sent in '92, and it took them 7 years to get to the first $1 billion. But in the next 4 years, it multiplied by about 100-fold. So we see NTN as probably on a similar path in that, you know, it's a technology that's kind of relatively nascent today, but is making very quick progress. You only need to look around this event to see the number of companies this year talking about NTN versus a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, it was a relatively small number of, you know, satellite companies promoting the coverage extension and the capability. Now, almost every MNO and carrier in the world, as well as a lot of the technology ecosystem, is talking about NTN. So I think progress is being made. I think one of the challenges for many of the participants in this is exactly who's going to pay for what. Yeah. It's been one of the biggest challenges, not just in NTN, but in other technologies, you know, with 5G, perhaps in some areas not having made back all the investment that's gone into it. There's a nervousness across some of the players as to exactly where are we going to see it monetized. Yes, coverage extension, text messaging when you're out of coverage, but the market is so much bigger than that, and there are so many more opportunities. So I think early days, but making good progress.
We are going to come back to the monetization topic, but good for flagging that. Willie, I'm sure the TM Forum's looked at this, but can you give us a sense of where AI has added value to date in terms of non-terrestrial networks?
Look, our view is it's still relatively early days. I think, to be fair, this is quite a complex environment. The history in terms of the terrestrial and non-terrestrial operators from a operating system point of view, from an architectural point of view, is very diverse. And the reality is you're actually layering on top of that, you're layering customer experiences, customer journeys. So things like policy and pricing, the notion of a harmonized service mesh across, I think, is very, very important. If you don't have that in place, if you don't have standard composable capabilities in place from an architectural point of view, it's going to be very, very difficult to extract the AI benefits. I think the technology is there. That's most probably not the challenge, but I'm sure in this conversation we'll exploit that in a little bit more detail. But you'll hear the forum, no surprise. I think we will very much like to encourage the industry to take more of an open, standardized approach to create this mesh, to make sure we have the foundation on which we can extract value, and ultimately we can drive monetization, because that's what everybody is after, right?
We're still building that foundation right now.
I believe so.
Yeah. Sachin, let's drill down a little bit on the operational backbone in particular. Talk about some of the use cases for AI in that context.
Absolutely. So just to elaborate on what Willie said, AI is not something that is an optional element of NTN. It's going to be a mandatory piece of the puzzle that we have to fix. The reason I'm saying that is because if you look at the complexity of the network that's in NTN, right? So you have satellites moving around all the time. You have the ground stations, you've got UVs, pretty much everything is moving at the speed of, like 8 kilometers per second is, for the LEO constellation. So you can imagine the complexity involved. So if you have to build an algorithm which can take care of these scheduling logic across these moving variables, it's going to be difficult. The standard scheduler is not going to help, which means you need to bring in an AI which can predict ahead of time exactly how the area of coverage would be and what kind of subscribers are going to be there, where is the density of population where you have to project the beams, How do you hop the beams when these satellites are moving, speeding across the geospaces? So there's going to be a lot of complex computation that has to be done. And if it is done well ahead of time, before the satellite really gets to the coverage area, it'll be able to give you a proper quality of service. And that's exactly what is needed for monetizing this network.
Yeah, there's no chance of doing that manually.
Yeah,
You've got to use AI for those use cases.
Exactly.
Yeah, Willie, if I can just come back to you for a second. Let's talk about the biggest friction, particularly when it comes in an NTN context around AI. What are the key challenges that satellite operators are facing in your view?
I think it goes back to the architectural fundamentals. I think it goes back to things like data models and aligning data models across to make sure that when you do apply AI, that you have access to clean data across the full life cycle. And as I said earlier, I think that's easier said than done. That's not what we have today. So I think to the extent that we do see the use of AI. In things like policy, as an example, I think it's going to be not optimal as yet. There's a lot more work that needs to be done on the foundational architectural fabric to allow us, I think, to get the full end-to-end power of AI for all the players.
Got it. Timothy, does that ring true to you? What's the biggest challenge you've got at Iridium?
I mean, at the moment for Iridium, our NTN service goes live this year, so we're in release 19 of the 3GPP standard, which was ratified recently. So deploying it and getting the rest of the ecosystem sort of accelerating development, chipsets, MNOs, platform players, is all part of the evolution for us. Those involved in release 17, NTN have a little bit of a head start, but that's okay. We have a global network already, so the good news is, relatively speaking, with the flick of a switch, we can be global as soon as we're comfortable with the quality of service. One thing I just want to point out, one of the challenges between bringing satellite and cellular together is you're talking about two industries that not only have traditionally operated with different technology stacks, proprietary versus standards-based, but you've also been dealing with two industries that have fundamentally dealt with different investment cycles.
Yeah. Right.
So, the satellite industry historically has had to make bets on 15 and 20-year lifespans for products and services. That isn't the case in cellular at all, and it certainly isn't today with things moving a lot faster. So one of the areas that I think, not only standardization, but AI can potentially bring is the opportunity to try, fail fast, implement quickly, and get insights quickly, because you won't have the opportunity to make those kind of long horizon investment decisions in future. And I think that's going to be an important part of satellite operators getting more comfortable with this kind of industry collaboration.
Let's just bring on Sachin on that point, actually. I mean, it's true, satellites historically have moved relatively slowly, this industry. You're in a very fast-moving space. How do you bring the two together?
Exactly, that's the key challenge, right? So all the use cases that have been talked about for day one deployment is the D2D roaming use case, right? So where you have to support your MNO subscribers to roam into the satellite where there are coverage holes. How do you do that? I mean, MNO network supports 5 nines reliability today, which it is very hard to get that kind of reliable service on the NTN. That's a challenge today that everyone has to solve. And this is where the whole industry is focused on right now. I mean, vendors like us, right, Mavenir, we know the pain points of the MNOs, where the things have to be, robust in terms of service. And we're trying to focus those aspects on the NTN side as well. For example, if I have to, like Tim talked about, right? How do I enforce the policies, right? If you're talking about a roaming scenario, your NTN will be connected to the MNO. So MNO will be driving the policy cases, right? Now the core is going to drive the policy, which means you need to have your access network on the NTN, honor those SLAs and QoS and all that stuff. So that's going to be the tricky part, and that's where I say AI is a must to solve those scenarios, right? So there's no other way out of it. So that is where the whole industry has to focus right now.
Yeah, it's the glue that brings it together, essentially. Yeah. Right, Willie. Let's turn to particularly commercialization, monetization in particular. So, let's talk about operational capabilities. What do we need to do to essentially monetize these services?
I think the tricky part here is that you really need to define things in a consistent way. So product, quality of service, associated policy, how do you deal with problems, breakdowns. I think that what's really critical is that you need the framework, right? And as I mentioned earlier, the canvas. And I think this is where maybe it's a good reason why I'm sitting in the middle here. I think it's really, really important that for these two industries, and I fully agree, Tim, I mean, we come from very different contexts and background, investment cycles, etc. As we bring them together is to have a common language. I think that's what we propose. You can't get to the AI extraction enabling monetization if you don't get to a common language around product, around service. Who owns the customer? I think we'll explore that. That's just an important question, right? Before you get to the monetization. But I also think, using AI to experiment, I think is definitely something that can help a lot. But we have to agree on the language and on the foundation. And this is where I believe the TM Forum Open Digital Architecture, which is so widely adopted from a terrestrial point of view, can also be applied here. And that's why we currently kicked off a collaboration project to actually test that and bring that to life as well. And it's great. Iridium is already involved with that.
So I was going to say the challenge for you is to bring the satellite community into that world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right, Timothy, let's come back to you. You talked about who pays for what earlier in your opening remarks. So let's drill down a little bit on that. What can you actually charge for? Can you charge for dynamic pricing? Can you charge for quality of service, for example? What are the monetization opportunities in that?
Good question. I'm on the sales, marketing, and product side at Iridium. I'm not a technologist per se, so absolutely monetization for me is who's going to pay, how much are they going to pay, and why are they going to pay. For the satellite industry, we've spent decades obviously finding pockets of customers around the world in use cases that are prepared to pay for satellite coverage, whether it's for reliability, resilience, coverage capability. But that's always been a relatively smaller part of the market because of the relatively higher cost. What NTN does is it lowers that bar quite dramatically. Standardization means that, the upfront capital device costs, potentially the recurring monthly costs, both of those things come down dramatically in the satellite space. And that then gives us more opportunity to explore. In the early days, for us at least, obviously D2D, satellite connectivity to standards-based smartphones, and even honestly, satellite connectivity to proprietary solutions in smartphones, which there are pockets of that around the world as well. That's pretty much a given, although it's not a particularly wide-scale thing. I also think if you look at D2C and D2D to smartphones, most carriers are not charging for this at the moment. Okay, so it really remains to be seen whether that's a viable long-term thing for them to do. Do they consider it table stakes, or will it eventually become something that honestly consumers aren't prepared to pay much more for? I think as you extend the value of what you're delivering over that, absolutely. If you can finally do the same experience on your smartphone as you do today on your cellular device, then I think there'd be much more appetite to do it. I'll just finish with one more thing. Our initial approach into the market this year is really around the IoT use case.
Yeah, right.
Fits our network, fits our technology. We're doing that both directly as well as roaming with carriers. That gives us the benefit of trying lots of different use cases because the IoT market is really wide and varied. So we will be doing a lot of experimentation in terms of how we price. Is it attach rates? Is it usage rates? Is it insurance only? All of these are going to be things that we're trying to see where are customers actually prepared to pay and what is a sustainable service for the long run.
Got it. Thank you. Sachin, let's drill down a little bit more on the quality of service aspect. If a satellite operator can guarantee quality of service, and I guess that is a bit of an if, to what extent can they monetize that, do you?
So, I mean, that is the table stakes, to be honest. QoS, without QoS, there's not going to be any monetization, opportunity for the operators. Now the question is, how do you do that? Question is, how do you make sure that you give the same quality of service that subscribers are used to in an MNO or a terrestrial network? That's going to be the biggest challenge that everyone has to, get past for them to really monetize the network. To be honest, as Tim talked about, it's not easy to put a price on any of the service that we can derive out of this network today. But of course, there are a lot of things that are moving still, like the handsets are not ready yet. Operators are still figuring out the D2D service use cases, how they have to deploy the satellites, how they have to architect the satellites. For example, look at the TCO aspect from a SNO point of view, right? So obviously there's a huge capex to launch the satellite, but once it's in space, power is free, cooling is free. You just have the satellites all around, running around this planet. So how do you take care of the rest of the piece is the puzzle that we have to, fix on the ground, which is how do I make sure that my NTN, baseband, and the core is fully aware of what's really happening in the region where the satellite is hovering around.
Right.
Second is obviously how do you anticipate things that are going to happen, and then make sure that your quality of service remains same. For example, you give a slice to a user, say that, okay, I'm going to give you X number of bits per second on that slice. How do you ensure that happens? Which means you need to look ahead and make sure that it's all the things in the pipe is put in place for the subscriber to get their experience. That's going to be the key challenge.
And it's not just making sure it happens, it's actually showing the customer that it happens.
Exactly. But AI can help you with that.
That's right.
Predictive nature that you need, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, as a forum, I think we agree that outcomes-based pricing and servicing of customer needs here is very, very critical. Not easy to achieve, but I think that outcome is critical.
Yeah, just staying on the D2D for a second, you mentioned that carriers aren't necessarily monetizing that at the moment, but potentially when it gets to more value-added services, potentially they could, right?
Yeah, they could, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the uses of satellite historically for the last several decades, it's predominantly been government, industrial, and enterprise. And we know there's a use case to pay for SLAs, service quality. It's how most of the satellite industry, including Iridium, has managed to, pay for the satellite services we offer and build the networks we do. The appetite of the consumer to pay incremental for something that they can't tangibly feel or see is a really questionable and challenging thing. It's tough for, us to get behind business cases if we can't, justify it, and it's tough for the carriers to do it. So I think a lot of experimentation is going to happen, just like there are services deployed today, and I think it will become easier over time as NTN gets woven into the fabric of what satellite operators provide. It'll become easier to deploy, easier to test, and therefore easier for people to see whether or not these payoffs make sense.
Yeah, okay. Sachin, I want to drill down on, particularly on this concept of, SLA-based slicing, particularly across moving satellite beams.
That's right.
It sounds technically challenging. What kind of operational guardrails, how can you make sure that you're actually delivering on what you promised then?
So there are three pieces of the puzzle. One, on the access side, you got to have I'll take an example of, recently we went live and demonstrated a voice over narrowband channel through a geo satellite. It was made possible because we, obviously innovated a lot of things in the scheduler, ensured that, we don't use certain bandwidth on the, the uplink and downlink channels. And it needed a lot of innovation to happen for us to realize this use case. This is just one example that I'm giving. So for us to ensure a QoS, so giving a service is one thing, but how do I ensure my speech goes through within a certain time, end to end? So that's the quality of service that a user would expect. Similarly, when you talk about the LEO with D2D, that's going to be the challenge. So there are three pieces. One, how do you make sure your scheduling logic is optimal? Second, how do you ensure you monitor the network and take corrective action in a closed automated loop, without which, having a manual, a person manually looking at issues that are happening and then trying to fix is not going to help. So you need to be really reactive. And of course, when you talk about slices, you need to stitch the whole story end to end with the MNO coming in, enforcing the policy, enforcing the slicing conditions, and of course, tying that to the billing system, and then ensuring that the subscriber is scheduled per his policy through and through. So it requires a lot of innovation across every single node that is involved in the system. So we're not there yet, and none of the solutions that are out today doesn't address this problem. So it's a journey that every product companies will have to go through to bring that kind of solution to the SNOs and MNOs.
Yeah, Willie, Sachin just alluded to this. It's quite a complex ecosystem, potentially. So, from your point of view as the TM Forum, how do you get partners working together in the right way to actually make this happen?
Well, I think, if parties, they work together if there's common interest.
Right.
And I think when it comes to the outcome of monetization, and you said it very clearly, Tim, is that, we're here to optimize our businesses, to make more money, right? So I think the rationale around establishing standards and platforms that serves the common industry has to have an outcome, and it needs to be it needs to enable easier monetization. I think that's very clear. TM Forum is in a very good position. We've got 800 members. We've just launched our satellite ODA project initiative, collaboration initiative, and the objective there really is to work across on everything we discussed this morning, to really sweat over the details and to see to what extent can we create an industry, call it fabric, foundation, leveraging ODA that's already there because it's been there for 5 years, to, with at speed, get us to the point where we can really get monetization a reality, but also the AI component we spoke about earlier. I think, repeating myself, but if we have the common service model there, then we can get to the AI value extraction much quicker across. The other thing we shouldn't forget about is customers. I think you mentioned that as well. This is something new for them. They're used to end-to-end seamless experience.
Yeah.
They don't want the interrupted experience. They don't want to know that there's a switch that's happening from a terrestrial tower to a satellite somewhere. It needs to be completely seamless from a pricing point of view, service point of view, recovery point of view, all of that. Yeah. So that needs to be thought through very careful as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to bring you in on that point, actually.
Well,
go on.
I do want to also sound a bit of a positive note. I mean, for the terrestrial industry, the cellular world, satellite is this relatively new, unknown, and there's a lot of uncertainty. For the satellite industry, we've been nurturing customers that have been using this technology, again, for decades. So we know that there is, an appetite, use cases, and a desire to extend and expand them as well. Yes, of course, we have customers that demand SLAs and demand reliability. They demand critical safety services because that's what a lot of what we do today is. So this is not an unusual thing. It's just been delivered historically as a separate kind of stovepipe set of technologies, and now we're trying to figure out how to bring them together in a complementary fashion. I mean, while some of the technologies are common, there are still some very satellite and space-specific things, power, the radio interface. Lots of things on satellite are fundamentally different because of the fact it's in space and not on the ground. So you're going to have some of these sort of growing pains, but ultimately I think it's a challenge that we're all up for. And the good news is, we're collaborating to make it happen.
Yes.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up before we get to the last topic. From a customer experience point of view, it needs to be clear who's actually delivering the service, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there is potential for confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Iridium's case, we've gone to market for the last 20 years through our own ecosystem of partners, distributors, by the way, which includes some carriers. We have people like Singtel and China Telecom who already deliver satellite-specific solutions on our current network. But we also go through OEMs and we go through, integration MVNO partners. So all sorts of ways to get to the market. The reason is we're experts in space, they're experts in their customers and their markets, or maybe their geography. We believe that's still going to be the case going forward. We just have an added extra expert, if you like, which is the M&O world. The M&O world becomes a new channel to market for not only us, but obviously a lot of the satellite industry. And we expect them to come to us with those use cases and to be the experts in how to deploy this with their customer set. So I think it's going to be a very collaborative and complementary set of relationships.
Well, you're right here at M&O World at MWC
Absolutely.
right now, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, Sachin, let's talk in particular about what we've learned from voice over narrowband IoT on non-terrestrial networks, because that's been a bit of an industry first for you guys. What have you learned from that?
Loads of things. First, obviously, it has its own unique challenges. When it comes to satellite network, it's not just about amount of bandwidth that's available. It's also about how do you integrate a new solution into a legacy system, right? When we started off on this journey, we had to work with bringing a 3GPP solution to work with technologies that are built to work in a closed, system, right? So we had to do a lot of, experiments in terms of how do I plug my 3GPP solution into the existing system. And of course, once you do that, then how do you make sure real-time aspects are taken care of? As I said, for voice, what matters is the timing of delivery, not really the reliability of the delivery, right? So you got to make sure your voice packets reach the other end within a certain time, without which you can't deliver a good user experience. So we did a lot of optimizations on the scheduler, on the way On the speech codecs as well, we do have some of the optimizations that delivered on the IMS core to optimize the codec that we select for the NTN. So a lot of these improvements have delivered as a good result in terms of user experience. So we're able to hit a MOS score of 3.5, which you hardly see in a real terrestrial network in some conditions, right? So if you're able to achieve that kind of MOS score in a non-terrestrial with a geo satellite running 32,000 kilometers away, it's something. So that's just an example of what we are entering into with the world of satellites. It's not easy, but just to add to Tim's point, right? So as a user, when I'm using the service across terrestrial, non-terrestrial, I don't want to feel any difference between these two networks. As an end user, I want to have the same coordinate service between these two networks.
Yeah.
To be honest, I want to feel like I'm in a common ubiquitous network wherever I go. So that's the goal of this whole NTN.
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? So we've only got a few minutes left, but let's focus on what's going to happen next. Willie, I'm going to start with you on this. We've got the roadmap, release 18, release 19, release 20, etc. To what extent will that harness AI for non-terrestrial networks?
Look, I think our view as the forum is, releases, obviously that's important, but it's how you practically adopt them that I think is really critical, and that's horses for courses. We do believe AI can really help with scale, also reduce your risk, help from a product point of view. So I do think as and when the releases come along, the adoption is application specific in terms of speed and extent. Pragmatism, I think, is really critical here. And then AI could definitely play a role. But once again, just as I said earlier, there's some preconditions that need to be in place if you really want to leverage the power of AI when it comes to future releases.
Yeah, got it. Timothy, you mentioned that historically it's been proprietary solutions in the satellite industry. Yeah. So you're now following a standards roadmap. How do you ensure that you move on from that traditional historic culture that you've had?
Well, we have the interesting challenge, which is that, I have a lot of customers and most of our existing revenue sitting on a proprietary network, and in parallel, we're delivering a standards-based solution. So I have to keep both worlds alive and transition gracefully from one to the other.
Right.
That's not unusual in telecom. I mean, 2G, 3G, 3G, 4G, LTE, 5G. This is the world of telecom. Yes. We're all moving standards-based solutions from one generation to the next, taking our customers with us. And in some cases, eventually we say, I'm sorry, that has to get turned off and the service is no longer available. Yeah. So we will go through the same kind of change and sort of transition that I think a lot of the cellular world has experienced. I think for the satellite industry at large, that's going to be a challenge which they're all going to have to embrace and going to have to kind of put on and get used to, because they've all historically been able to sort of maintain their own proprietary set of networks and generally keep those customers for a long, long time. That technology life cycle is going to change much more rapidly now, and we're all getting used to it and we're all embracing it. So, yeah.
It feels like a cultural challenge, but you're well aware of it.
It is, absolutely. But I also say that not all of it is bad. I mean, some of the technology sort of skills, experience, and life cycle is a positive. At the same time, there are some unchangeable challenges of operating in space, which the satellite industry also has to sort of educate and upskill the terrestrial world about. I mean, space fundamentally is hard. I know rockets are getting launched every week and it seems like it's really simple. It's a high risk, high capital intensive industry, and that's probably not going to change for the next decade or two. You
can't ignore those challenges.
You can't.
Sachin, we're almost out of time, but I just want to quickly get your thoughts on how we avoid silos in this ecosystem in particular, because you work with a lot of different players.
Yeah, so I think the specs are evolving. It's definitely helping everyone to bring together the solution. The vendors are obviously, approaching the way the specs are defined, right? They're not going with their own proprietary implementation anymore, which is good. The one piece of the puzzle still waiting to happen is the handset. That's something that we are all waiting for, and something that's not coming so soon to the market. So hopefully that, enabling the actual consumer devices to talk to NTN, especially the LEO satellites, would be a definite, a boost, for this whole industry, adoption of the service, right? So
Got it. So a little bit of work to do there.
a lot of work to do.
Gentlemen, we're out of time, but thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for taking us through a lot of topics there. And thank you to you, the audience. Thank you to you online as well. Really enjoyed your company. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Very much.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Tim.